1 second here. There we go. Okay. Well, thank you, Drew, for
He took off.
thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it, and as he said, I do lots of things in the diocese, but RCA is one that I do. I work with the parishes and with the coordinators, and I certainly do the rites as we do the rite of election, the call of continuing conversion at the cathedral. So I'm really glad to be here because I am finding more and more deacons and wives are getting involved in the RCA process in their parish. And in particular for the deacons, it's always the rites. You will be assisting with those in every way you can. But I am finding more and more becoming coordinators and working closely. I was laying in bed last night counting in my head, there's probably 15 to 20 deacons that are actively doing RCIA in their parish, either as a coordinator or certainly as a catechist. And there's many, many roles that are involved in RCIA, from being the coordinator to a team member to a catechist to, So anyway, I'm very glad to be here. Yeah. Break time is open to me. Great. Okay. Well, let's see.
If you don't want to give them one, that's fine.
Oh, no, I'm sure we'll need to go to the party or something. All right. So you guys are all probably wondering why there's an onion. I probably gave it away when I put the slideshow there. But why there's an onion and why there is a roulade on your table. Drew said you had some thoughts. Nobody wants to share though, right? Robert?
Rocio said that it was for us to weep.
Oh, okay.
I say because being part of a process such as the diaconate or RCA, you start on the outside and you go deeper into the layers. That's what
That's what it is. It is very, very, let's see if I can get this together, many layers, and they're different every time. That's the beauty of RCIA, and you dig deeper and deeper into it. I can't tell you how many times I've reread something, and see, this is sad, but this is how much I've used my book. It's starting to go. But there's so much in the rite, and you will find different things at different times. And sometimes your RCA will look one way, and then the next year it looks like something else. Because you never know who is going to be coming. And so it is multi-layered. And it's sweet, and it's a little bitter sometimes, and it's a little sad, and then sometimes it's a joyful sad, and you do cry. Because these people are sharing their stories with you while they're there. So let me just ask really quick, who is right now actively involved in RCIA? Oh, good. So if any time you want to pipe in and share anything or have some thoughts or comments, please feel free, because I'm certainly by no means an expert. I always have a pen and paper to write things down if people have questions, or if I am not sure myself. I will send this to Lenora and have her send the whole PowerPoint to you if you would like. All right? So you don't, sure. And I was going to print them on the things with the number of slides and all that, and I thought, they get so tiny I can't see them. Great.
What's the target audience? RCA, who is it for?
We're going to get to that in just about 3 slides. Okay? And there's a lot of confusion on that, so it's actually a really, really good question. And it's a process, not a program, and that's also confusing to people. So we'll talk about all of that. So it's many layered, and then the heartburn. This is my prescription of the Rolaids, but it gives heartburn. And I don't just mean physically heartburn because you think, oh my gosh, I just need this over. I was so tired. Let's do the Easter Vigil. I've been working so hard. But more of heartburn, of people having a burning for God, for the love of God. What is bringing them to the church? And how are you and your team helping them get to where they need to be so that they can feel part of the community? So that little Rolade is for you to take and chew when you're having a bad day, but it's also a reminder that we are creating this burning and this yearning and this desire in these people's heart to know who God is. And sometimes you're going to get people who have no idea who Jesus is. They don't even know, but something's calling them there. And then sometimes you're going to have people coming that they think they know, but they're afraid to say anything. And sometimes you're going to get people that know everything. And those are also a challenge. And how do you work with them? So RCA stands for, This is what we're gonna talk about. So we're gonna talk, I'm gonna give you like a brief origin and sort of a brief history of how it all came about. Who belongs? I think that was your question. The 4 periods, because there are 4 periods of RCIA. We're gonna talk about the pastoral directives, so that'll be sort of your guiding as you work. All of the rights that are associated with each period, and as a deacon, you will be very involved with those. Some you can do, some you will be assisting with. We're gonna talk about children in the process, because it is a little bit different, or can be different, depending on the parish, the pastor, and the number of children. We're going to talk about welcoming the baptized. Those are our candidates. We have catechumens, which I'll talk about, and then our candidates. Those are people who we recognize their baptism. Right?
Trinitarian baptized.
Excuse me?
Trinitarian baptized.
Exactly, by the formula, exactly, through the water. And that's specifically in here, so we'll talk about it. We're going to talk briefly about marriage only, and I'm going to share with you what the RCA coordinators are told. Okay, but they will more than likely be coming to you as a deacon and the pastor to get the enrollment started and going, okay? Because I don't expect my coordinators to do that process. That whole enrollment issue is coming through the deacon and through the pastors, okay? And then we'll talk about resources, because there's a lot of really good resources out there. And I think what I want to do is really kind of give you an overview of what it is, so that when you do go to your parish, if you haven't worked in it before, you at least have an aha, I know what they're talking about. Or a father comes to you and says, I need you to do, Tom and I have a situation, I need you to do this, you'll be like, okay, I know where that fits in, okay? And it is, as I said, it's really multi-layered, and there's many aspects to it. And I hate to say this, and what we say stays in here, but there are some pastors that do not understand the process. I'm just going to come right out and say it. But we have to work with them, okay? Many of our foreign-born priests are some.
Is that cultural, not being negative?
No,
Is that
not
cultural? You don't have to
necessarily.
let
No,
go?
I have a couple of pastors that are
Okay.
from here that either don't
Still
understand it
don't
or
get it.
don't want to understand it. And some of it has to do with how it's implemented, and if it's not looked as a process, but it's looked as a program, then they want it to be more academic, and they want it to be 9 months, and yeah.
It's a program from September to April.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be, and we'll talk about that, because the right doesn't call for that. The right calls it for it to be year-round.
Yeah.
Because if you give them the full liturgical year, the best you can, that might not be 12 months, it might be 10, it might be 11, but if you're giving them all 4 periods in a full year of the liturgical year, you're going to see, and I hate to say this because it sounds very like I'm selling something, but retention for those people is better. We used to do a 9-month at St. John the Baptist, and at one point, honestly, we had like 90 people, because we had just started doing our CAA, and the parish had just started, and we were just like, we never saw them again after Easter, because there was too many of them, but we also didn't get them involved from day one in the community. And that's so important. If you have a whole year, you can get them involved in activities right off the bat. They can come to a fish fry. They can come to this. They can come to that. They can help with the soup kitchen. You can get them very, very involved in the community after the inquiry period. Very, very simple. And then they have that love, that burning, that desire to be part. And from that, their faith grows. So, question?
You answered it.
Okay, great. Like it when I do that. Okay. So RCA, it stands for the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. There is an actual rite book. You should be able to locate that there in your parish. I recommend, and we can talk about this a little later, is putting a presider's book together and not trying to follow the rite book, because I find it difficult when I'm doing a rite to have to keep flipping the pages and holding this heavy book open. So I recommend a presider's book that's tailored exactly for the rite, that says what you say and what the people do, and it's in a binder and you can follow it easier. And then there's the study guide you have, which we will talk about. You guys have used this some, right? Okay. A lot in it. Really rich rite. So it's a process through which adults and children join or complete their initiation into the Catholic Church. So the one thing I really, really want you to remember is it's a process, not a program. That's a terminology we are trying very hard from the diocese to push to the parishes. Now, that said, we have pastors who don't see it that way and won't do it that way. Okay? And you just do the best you can to give those people the fullness of the right of it as you can. We have had parishes move, like St. Joseph was a 9-month, they went to a year-round. Guess what? One Easter Vigil, they didn't have anybody go through the Easter Vigil. Father was okay with that. Everybody came up and said, we don't have anybody baptized. We don't have anybody. Nope, not this year because we changed. And then after that, no problem. And every year, they have a smaller number of people because it's year-round going through the Easter Vigil. They just did 7 readings instead of, the 4 or 5 that we might do. They did all 7. It was very lovely, they said. It was strange not to have anything, but it happens. And it was only 1 year. St. John the Baptist does a year-round too. People will tell you they can't implement a year-round because they don't have enough people, or they don't know what they're doing, or I sometimes think they just don't I think they don't try or they don't understand. It's beautiful if you can do it that way, but it does take people. Now, the interesting thing, it takes more people, but the more people have less time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll explain that when I start to show it. I have kind of a circle graph of what a process looks like. So we just kind of remember that it's a process, and even if it's 9 months, it's still a process, okay? It's not an academic program. It's not religious ed, it's not faith formation. It's a process because you're involving these people, you're meeting them where they are and finding out what it is that they need. And certainly if you teach the Trinity at a certain time, they may get it, they may not get it. I may get it, you may not get it. But if you go that whole year, sometimes they can get it twice. And then it makes more sense to them, if that makes sense.
We like to call it a journey.
And it's a journey, absolutely. It really, really is, and that works as well as a process. It's just not saying that program. Now, in some parishes, the DRE does it, and in some parishes, it's a separate person. I don't have, all the DREs that I know that are doing it are doing a really, really good job because they understand what it is, and they are still keeping it under the 9 months, but, okay. So, let's just talk a little bit about the origins. The sacrament of baptism, of course, has been celebrated ever since the early church. And in the New Testament, the risen Christ tells the disciples, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. St. Paul, of course, speaks about baptism as clothing yourself in Christ, or having put on Christ. How many of you use albs at the Easter Vigil for your newly baptized? Put on clothing. Our baptismal garment are albs, right? And then, of course, we also have in the Acts of Apostles, there are narratives of baptisms of individuals, families, and households as the disciples went out. So, going way back to the beginning, okay, there we go, in the early church, becoming Christian was no easy task, actually. The candidates were coming from either a pagan or a philosophical background, and so the truths about God, about this new Judeo-Christian tradition were really foreign to them. They didn't understand it. But as early as the 3rd century, a process began that integrated the members into the church and was developed. The candidates were usually brought to the community by someone else, by a sponsor. And they would come to, and that sponsor would confirm, oh no, that's not the right word. The sponsor would verify this person's character. Yes, he's interested in the church. Yes, he's a good person. Yes, I think he would be great to join. Sometimes it took as long as 3 to 4 years for them to receive the full catechetical process into joining the church. They would be then finally be examined at the end of that time and be chosen for the baptism, and then it usually took place at Easter like it does now.
Ruth?
Uh-huh.
What year would this be? When you say the early church,
Mhm.
I'm thinking like 100 or 200 years later
Well,
from
we're
the
talking
commission.
3rd century.
the 3rd century.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're talking, it was about, so they went quite a while with that because they were persecuted too, so it was
Yeah.
all done in secret. And you weren't getting, when we look at the 4th century, when the church became okay, if you want, then people were diving, going in groves to become Catholic because that was the church, that was the state religion and it was okay. But up until here, it wasn't. So yeah, it's in the 3rd century when the process really started to become about. There was enough people to understand what it meant now to be Christian and willing to be persecuted for it, really. So So then that moves us, as it became the religion of the empire, more and more people sought to become catechumens so they could bear the title of Christian, because it was the state religion, so it was cool, it was great. They didn't all know why they were becoming Catholic, but Christian, but they still were. This actually is interesting because it led to a far weaker sense of commitment on part of the many of them, so they were just doing it because everybody was doing it or was to be expected. And sometimes they would wait till the end of their life before they were baptized, because trying to live the Christian life that was expected of them was so difficult that they were Christian by name, but they would wait till the very end to be baptized. Does that make sense?
It's all for sins.
It's what? It's at the very end before you die. That's exactly. There you go. And we see Catholics today like that, do we? I'm sorry.
Constantine did that.
Did he? All right. So you know what I'm talking about. Great. So in the decline of so really the decline began in the 4th and 5th centuries, and then it just kept progressing on. Due to the decreased number of pagan conversions and the large number of Christians wanting their children to become baptized, that became the norm, to have our children baptized. So there was less adults, because there was less pagans, and more children. And because of the high mortality rates too, they thought, because of sin, we better get these kids baptized right away, right? Because children are born with sin right away, and we've got to baptize them right away. So the norm became infant baptism, and the adult began to diminish. There were still people who joined the church, but less and less. The rite still included an opening dialogue, renunciation, profession, exorcism, creed, and Lord's Prayer. But the preparation, as this went along, the preparation got less and less, the period got less and less. You know, at one point they would even just say to the parents, "Are you ready to do this?" And the parents would say yes, and they do it. And it was that simple. Yeah. So the preparation was done by the priest, and the role of the sponsor, who was a real big part of it now in RCIA, was really, really diminished, all right? I lost my place here. Okay.
It's unfortunate that the priest's role is diminished. I understand why.
The priest's role, at that point, yes.
Not today. I understand why.
Today?
It's just a lack of priests. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not,
Yeah.
well, it's almost like it's a side process, a side program.
But, well,
You run a roof.
well, you know, and that's not 110% true, because there are some pastors that are fairly involved in it.
Okay.
It's really the role, I think, of the person in charge of the team to invite that pastor to be integrated. Now, that doesn't mean he comes to every class, but maybe he does the church tour. Maybe, we used to do Q&A with Father Moore. He'd come in and they just ask him all kinds of things. Why do Catholics do this? Why do they do that? Why do they kneel? Why do they stand? What is the rosary? And he would just answer the questions. You know, if you're inviting the catechumenates and the candidates to the soup dinner, then maybe Father sits at that table with them so they get to know him. If you're going to do discernment correctly, it should involve the person who is going to move to the next step, the team, the coordinator, and the pastor. There's actually, the form says, the pastor actually has to sign the form that says that this person is ready to move on to the rite of election. So he has to know them in some way. Now, yes, we have less and less priests, and they're not as actively involved. But you and maybe the priest is the one who does some of the teaching, which is great too. You know, you have to sit down at the beginning of the session or the beginning of your process for however long it is and say, here's the things we want to cover. I'm going to have a deacon do this one. I'm going to have a priest do this one. I'm going to have Jeff come over from that parish and do this one. I'm going to have someone else, you know. We're going to watch a video on this one. You know, we're going to read a book on this one. So, yeah, they're not as involved, and I really think it is, A, they don't quite understand the process, B, they simply do not have the time. But it's evangelization, and that is part of our mission for everyone. For everyone. Yeah.
Let's say you had a priest that was super, super busy, but you had like one marker, and that marker allowed you to have the priest teach one subject.
Mhm.
What would you choose?
I would ask what you would like to teach.
And he said he'd teach anything but just one. What would you ask him?
One that I couldn't teach. One I couldn't find someone to teach. For me personally, it would be the Trinity, because I think that is a really hard one for people to understand.
It's hard for everybody.
Exactly, and the priest could say that, this is hard for everyone. And I think it just really depends Have you had that situation?
No,
No, you're just asking,
I
okay.
just asked.
Yeah, I think it really depends. What does Father Norman teach for you guys? Anything?
Well, he
Or Father
teaches it-
Mannion too, yeah.
Father Mannion teaches the Trinity,
Great.
and Father Norman teaches morality and
There you go.
social
Social
justice, which is
Very
his
good.
area of expertise.
Excellent.
That's what I was gonna say, if they have an area that
Mhm.
they like, then that's a good subject for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you guys have Father Yardsey come in at all?
Yeah, he comes
Yeah, a little
in, not to teach, but just to,
To observe and to
Visit.
meet the people,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, he does it a couple times.
Good, yeah, you've gotta have that
Yeah.
connection. Because
And-
they're gonna
and-
see him up on the altar and they're gonna go, who is that guy?
And believe it or not, and this I don't necessarily agree with, but he asks what their state of their marriages are.
You know, actually, we'll talk about that because you do have to ask that, but there's ways to ask it at the time to ask it, so it doesn't seem inappropriate. But
Yeah,
we'll
because
talk about-
he's made some faces go red.
Yeah, that, it should not be done in a group, it should be done on an individual basis, and it should be done prior to the rite of acceptance. Because you're not, it's not, you have an inquiry period and there's people in there wanting to know about the church, you're not gonna talk about have you been married or not.
So how we adapted to that reality
Mhm.
is we do, as a team, you find out individually,
Yes,
and then we tell the priest.
yes, and then he meets with them,
Yes.
yes. And we'll talk about that, Robert, that's excellent. And that's all RTA is, a lot of adapting to make it work within with your people that you have every year that are different, and with the pastor, and with your space. I know Peters and Paul struggles with dismissals because they simply do not have a room to have them in, unless they go outside and across the street, you know, so, you know, it depends. So, okay, we're digressing, but we'll try to get your questions answered. Okay, where are we? So, so over this gradual fading, the catechumenate disappeared, and the church's stance on infant baptism was what it was. We were gonna all be baptized as infants. Okay, so it was actually restored in 1965 by the Second Vatican Council. And they brought this catechumenate for adults. It was comprised of steps marked by rites. So we have our periods, there's a rite, a new period, and a rite, and then the Easter Vigil, and then another period. So once again, it was connected to that Easter Lent cycle, and it brought in the celebration of Christ's death and resurrection. And so from that came this and the rite. And just to let you know, they actually are redoing this, but it could be a while because they're very slow. And, you know, after the change of the Roman Missal to the new words, they did this gap, which you guys will get. They did the children, they've done marriage, baptism is out now, confirmation is next, and then this is the last one they'll tackle. But there are some concerns about this one, and so this one may take longer. Because it was written, I think in I think this one came out, well, there was one that came out in 65, and then this one came out in, I think it was 89 maybe, or 90, yeah, 88. It hasn't changed since, and there's some things that need to be addressed in it. And we're not the only diocese that has a mixture of year-round and 9-month. That's all over the United States, okay? So we're not the only ones. We strive for the best, we try to do the right as rich as we can, but we have to, as you'll learn as deacons, even though the pastor, how do I say this? You work for the bishop, but you have to have that relationship with your pastor. And sometimes we have to do what he wants us to do, which can be challenging.
Are there areas, it seems, again, I'm not involved in RCIA.
Mhm.
It's obviously very parish-centric.
Yes.
Are there places where it's diocesan-centric? In other words, is the diocese you know of who says, hey, I want you, you all have the ability to do what you want to do, but here's some material that I want shown that everybody, all, you know, more driven from the diocese?
No,
Really?
not really. I do formation. I try to be as big a help as I can. I get a lot of phone calls from coordinators asking me things. I send out lots of materials and information. We certainly do the rite of election, which has to be done by the bishop at the cathedral. But other than that, he has not come out with anything that says it must be done this way or this has to be discussed. And I think it's
Or
because,
the diocese recommends this.
exactly.
training or
Well,
this program.
yeah, no, not yet. Now, he may change his mind, but at this point, he's got so many,
Maybe later.
no, he's just got so many fires that he's trying to work on. We may eventually get to there. I know Bishop Wester was very in favor of year-round, and we were working on trying to figure out how to get that to happen. But again, it's difficult, and so I'm not sure what this new bishop is.
So,
I think that's an important thing to do, I mean, down the road, obviously with all these new social media, I'm gonna say these people that claim to be Catholic that aren't really, you know,
Mhm.
if you're not properly catechized, even in an RCIA program, you're bound to, and if the instructor or if the process leader is leaning that way, obviously you have that fail-safe of the priest that's watching things,
Right.
but it would just make no sense if it was
Well,
some synergy from the diocese. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm saying,
right, well, and we
this is what
don't,
we want you, the
Right.
guidelines we want you to use.
well,
Tailor them, but
I'm gonna
this
show
is-
you the next thing we're gonna talk about is the pastoral directives, which should be followed.
Okay,
You know,
yeah.
those do need to be followed. And I offer as much formation as I can. And to be honest, I have a pretty good relationship with the coordinators. I know who they are, and they know me, and they're calling me and asking them questions. And so I think at this point, but who knows? Yeah. Greg, did you have a question?
so the resistance to go year-round, is that from just particular pastors because they're worried about labor force?
I think so. Or they're worried about not having enough people to teach, because they don't understand that it isn't completely 100%. Your session for RCA, you don't have to sit in a room and show them something on a PowerPoint. You can go out to St. Vincent's Soup Kitchen.
So
You see what I'm saying?
is it
So-
mostly volunteer-driven?
Oh, yeah, well, minister driven. Initiation ministers are the ones that do it, but yeah, it is, it's just, yeah, now, we have a few parishes where the RCA coordinator is paid a small stipend. Sometimes it's the DRE, so it falls under their purview, so they are being paid as well, some small stipend. But yes, a lot of times it is. So where are you, and that's one of the things I work with the coordinators and teams is where do you find more team members? How do you get, Robert, how did you get involved in RCIA? Someone asked
Well,
you?
no.
Okay,
I was, Don Schaefer,
okay, yes,
He
he did
was
it for
the
many years.
DRE.
Yes, he did it for years.
and it was a one-man show.
Yes,
I came in kind of as a transition, so when he left,
to the DRE.
so when he
You would
left,
be the one man show.
RCIA didn't become, it separated from the DRE
Good.
function,
Okay,
and we created a team.
and that's what you have to have.
So I teach like 1 or 2 classes.
Yeah.
And there's like, I get Robert Catlin coming down,
Yes.
teaching once a month.
Yeah.
You know, we got a pretty robust team,
And
but it's
Tony's-
taken years.
And Tony's your coordinator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and by the way, you need a good
The
coordinator.
coordinator's different, they're not gonna get up and teach, they're gonna coordinate.
Yeah,
They're gonna
but
keep the
he-
people
he is-
going. Yeah.
You know, he is worth gold because he coordinates it all. I had other things going on, so it's kind of like when Tony came on board, the team was, you know, I painted the vision for him, but then he contacted you,
You came to my training.
and so he's become the expert in the parish for the RCIA.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, all of you have, I don't know who your coordinator is.
Teresa Ward.
Teresa, she's new, but she's working,
Yeah.
I've been working with her.
Okay.
Yeah, and you have Sunday and Susan, so, and you guys have Mary, who's done it for years, so yeah, you all, and
Who
you
do
got,
I?
you have Tammy,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she's paid.
and she's a paid DRE, but she keeps it going. So it just really depends on the parish, but yeah, I think some of the reluctance to go to year-round is the fact that it's volunteer-driven, and then who are we gonna get to come in the summer? That's what they always say. But that's when you can do inquiry, for gosh sakes. You know, that's it, once a month, get together with them, answer their questions, go out for coffee. Meet in a house, you know, you don't have to make it complicated. Exactly, you don't have to sit at a desk, no. Jeff?
So you talk about, you know, this 9 months versus a year. I'm curious, do you have any groups that you know of that during that time are separating out the candidates and the catechumens and having them come at different times, even different days or different sessions?
That's how you do it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how St. John the Baptist, they have, well, you know, we'll get to it in just a minute, because I'm gonna show you this
Okay.
circular chart
Great.
like thing that'll explain
Yeah.
how you could do it year-round. Your Mary has keep talking that she's gonna do it, and then she never does it.
Yeah.
And she's afraid to take the step. I said, don't, just do it.
Jeff, are you the coordinator or are you a?
No, he's
teacher?
helping, you're helping,
Are
right?
you part
The
of the team or?
I coordinated last year, but this year, Father said, no,
Too much.
Too much.
So you are a part of the team?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but this year, it's really weird, because we have a small group, but we have people, like Ruth is saying, you know, they don't know who Jesus is, some of them have never seen the Bible, and then we
You
have,
have people that have been baptized Catholic.
We
but
have a
never-
Protestant
And
minister.
they don't belong in our city.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, but you
we have a
have.
Protestant minister that's going.
Yeah,
So it's like two ends of the spectrum, and how do you,
How to make it work.
yeah, make it work when you
Like,
make
so you're
class?
talking over their head, but yet you're wanting him to come
Exactly.
back next week and
Yeah.
talking
It's
to
a
you,
challenge.
you've lost her.
It's always a challenge.
Yeah.
It really is, and that's why I show you that onion, because it's just
And if
different.
you split days, you need more manpower.
Well, you would, but just less manpower, because if you have, okay, I'm getting ahead.
Anyway, yeah, we're
We're
getting
gonna
off
move on.
track.
Okay,
We'll never
let's
get
answer
rid of
Greg's
that.
question, is who belongs in it first, okay? That's always a question. Okay, so these are some terms you need to be familiarized with. Uncatechized, that means someone who has never stepped foot in a church and has no idea who God is, or has a vague notion of who God is, and has not been baptized. And this is a baptism that we do not recognize. So our LDS people,
Okay.
we do not recognize,
Non-proper
because as what
baptism.
Greg says, it has to do with the way baptism and the
Right.
form, and, you know, the water and the Trinitarian, the whole thing. And if you look, well, we'll get into it, because
Okay.
we can talk about it. But the catechumen, this process really is designed, I mean, if, we have candidates, because we have people coming to us who are baptized in another religion that we do recognize, like Methodist
Right.
or Presbyterian. So in the United States, they wanted to have a place to put them, they didn't want to ignore them. So we've got candidates, we've got catechumens. Anyway, the first people that belong in the process are uncatechized and not baptized. So those are our catechumens. They start out as inquirers, and then they move into the catechumenate. Then we have uncatechized and baptized. Those are our candidates, okay? Now, I'm talking uncatechized in this sense as they could come from another Christian religion, but they're not catechized in the Catholic, what we feel, what we think, what we believe.
Or baptized Catholic.
Or
but
definitely not
never-
baptized
But
Catholic.
never,
We'll talk about those.
okay.
We'll
Okay.
talk about that, that's a totally different, yeah.
Okay, so these are
These are
really,
Christians.
So they don't know things like the real presence and stuff like that.
this is Lutherans or something like that.
Well,
for
yeah,
example,
or
maybe
it's a Methodist, or it's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
Presbyterian,
okay.
or,
And-
yes,
and they
exactly.
understand their religion
Yeah.
a little bit, but they
Yeah.
want, okay, gotcha.
And a lot of times, what you're gonna see here are people who were not baptized at all,
Yeah.
or people who were baptized, maybe went to church as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, my mom, we were baptized, my husband was, he's baptized Methodist, they went 3 or 4 years, they moved to a new city and they never went again. So he knew he was baptized, but he didn't know anything about anything.
So, Dell was
Yeah.
in a can.
What are the
That was a
percentages
candidate.
usually when you have a class of 10?
I would say in Utah, to be honest, it's more candidates than catechumens, really, because they're coming from other faiths, or they're coming, but you do get people from the LDS faith.
So LDS.
LDS is a catechumen. Mhm.
Simply
and-
because we don't recognize the baptism.
Exactly, and you
Don't
have
do
to
that
be
in any
very
disparaging way.
sensitive about how you approach that.
Right, right,
I think Monsignor Fitzgerald has a great definition when he talks about the LDS, saying, because in our eyes, they're not Christian because of their baptism, but they're Christian in action, for sure.
right. Absolutely.
So you say that in that way, because, I mean, you don't go up and say, oh, we don't recognize your baptism, but I was baptized. Well, you weren't baptized, you don't have to use the word recognize, you just say you were not baptized
In our
the-
formula.
in our formula, exactly.
And according to the LDS church, none of us are in their formula, so
And you can put
everyone.
that back.
So that's something they
That's,
understand.
and that's why they do the baptism, right,
Okay.
for the deaf, when I moved here, I thought it was for the
Okay.
deaf, it's for the dead, you know, I didn't know. Sorry, I didn't know. So, for the, it's the dead, yeah, exactly. So those are 2 groups that definitely belong in the process, and we'll talk about each one separately, because there are different rights for the catechumenans as opposed to for the candidates. We recognize the candidates differently because of the virtue of their baptism, okay?
Okay.
We also have catechized but not baptized, okay? So maybe someone's been coming to church with their spouse for years, absolutely 20 years. Their kids went through Catholic school. Their daughter got married in the Catholic, they know all about the Catholic Church, but they've never been baptized.
And anyway,
And then they just decide, I want to become Catholic. So maybe, they may not need this whole process. They may want to do the whole process. It depends on what they want. Now, my husband, he was a candidate, but we were married in the church. Our son went to Catholic school. He went to Mass. I didn't always go. He took my kiddo. He went every Sunday. My son was confirmed, and he went up to his dad and said, it's your turn. And my husband said, you know, it probably is. So he had gone to Mass for 20 years, you know, how was my son? 14?
Yeah.
Well, but we were married 8 before that. He'd gone a long time. He
Yeah.
knew all about the church. So at that point, they said to him, do you want to go through this? Or do you, he said, I'm gonna come to as many as I can because I wanna make sure I really understand. Okay? But you might get someone else who says, you know, I don't need as much. So then you're doing a smaller formation. So then you might look at what you've got offered for the process and say, what would you like to come to? You know, we're gonna get you a sponsor to keep connected with you and you know what's going on and you'll be doing all the rights that are to the candidate. But you don't necessarily have to come to every single one. Okay? So again, this is that discernment, that's assessment that you have to do with people when they first come in. That's why the inquiry period is so wonderful, because you have a couple of months to figure out where they're at. And sometimes just listening to what they say when they're sharing their stories is telling you, this person has a marriage. I'm gonna have to get together with them and make sure.
Do you do interviews with people
Yes, you do,
before?
you do.
You don't want to wait for a 3-month background, just
Exactly.
learn this by
And we'll,
osmosis, you actually have an interview.
we'll talk about that too.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, there's an interview that you can do at a certain time, so. All right, and so then the last group that I put up here is Catholics, catechized and baptized, okay? They don't go into, it's not faith formation, all right? I know we lack that, and I think that's another deterrent to why priests don't want to go year-round in RCIA, because they figure we need to be offering, if I'm going to spend the time and money and energy, I should be offering something faith formation for everybody, which we don't do. I mean, we're not very good at that. Parishes are getting better, but we're still not very good at it. Yeah,
But you know, on occasion, we have somebody, we do invite
I know.
people in
Okay.
that not necessarily gonna be, they just want education. So it really makes it rich, and we allow them to come in, and sometimes they can even become a sponsor.
Yeah, and so
That's the way we pull them into RCIA.
But and that's fine. I'm just saying it's
But
not,
they're-
should not be designed as faith formation for just, you know, anybody come anytime you want. So it's a special guest speaker, or it's this, or it's that. Sometimes it's the spouse of someone who's going through and they just want to come with them. And what you're not going to say, no, you can't come.
It's not faith formation.
Not for the parish on a whole,
Okay,
not
'cause
for
we
Catholics.
advertise that.
I know
before
some
saying,
people
hey,
do.
can I-
Anybody
Or
come
for
with
anybody
that.
that wants to learn more about your faith, come join us.
Yeah, that's not what
Whoa,
RCA is
whoa,
for.
whoa.
No,
Okay,
it's really not.
What's the
And-
downside?
The downside is there are people that are coming in here that are very vulnerable and they're not sure they want to be there and they're not sure how they want to share.
It's protecting them.
Exactly, yeah. But that doesn't mean that they can't get to know the community either, because they do need to know that. So that's when going out to the community and doing some of those activities, or having a speaker like Father is talking about this and say to the group, we're going to invite the whole parish. They're all going to be here, so we just want you to know.
Well, like we had one person come in, you know, we invited him to come in, and he turned out to have seminarian, he had been a seminarian, and was using this class, and his grievances started to come out.
Yeah?
So it's kind of like,
Yeah?
that's what she's saying, you don't want to just let
Yeah.
anybody come in.
Yeah.
You've got to filter that.
And that's why if you invite the congregation, I think it needs to be at special times or for special speakers, let the group know this is open to the whole entire parish. Because they also form their own little bond too.
Right.
And you don't want it to be so cookie that when they're finally join the church, they still want to be with them, but they make friends and they make connections. And so, you know,
So are we using the word catechize is synonymous with Sunday Mass?
part of
I
it,
hear-
part of it is coming to mass,
It's
yes.
more than that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
but
we're
it's a
saying
little
you're
bit more.
catechized and baptized, if you want more.
You're knowing
If
your.
you're catechized, you already know your religion, that's the definition of
Right.
catechism.
Right.
So what I'm reading here is that, I understand how we're using it, but you might have that person that comes to Mass every week.
Mhm.
You know, I'll be honest with you, I went to Mass every week, I didn't learn my faith going to Mass.
Well, and that's what you have to ascertain from the person, that's what I'm trying to say, is what do they bring to the table? And is it, do
So
they
it's not
need
catechized.
social
If
teaching?
you're
Do
going
they
to
need
church
this, do
weekly,
they?
then they're not catechized at all.
And maybe they don't need to go to the lessons or two on this or that, but maybe they need to go to the lessons on this.
They need to clip out of some of the lessons.
There you go, there you
That's a
go.
good way to say it, club out. Yeah,
So Ruth, I'm thinking about Dale, and he's really not
What?
catechized and not baptized, right? Because he was baptized. So
Yes.
he's more just a profession of faith, right? And then my question
Exactly.
is they can be outside of RCIA as well,
Exactly,
right?
they can be.
just come in and make their profession of faith.
Where's our
start going to
ending?
Mass.
Exactly, exactly. You know, that's very true, and you can, and we'll talk about that. There are those candidates who don't need much except some preparation and a little bit of formation and some time with the priest or the deacon. Yes, you can bring them into the church at any time. It says no unnecessary burden on them. So that was what they said to him. You can come through all of this, or we'll just do a short thing with you. He chose to do it all because he wanted the experience. Yeah, great. All right, let's move on here. So what are the components of our CIA? Well, and I think we've covered some of this, it's both formational and educational, okay? So there's a balance between the two. It's important to understand, you know, teaching gives knowledge, but faith formation, catechizing, if you will, is more of a witness and facilitating conversion, okay? So it's evangelizing is really what it is. So you're going to teach them things. Are they going to know everything when they come out? All right, is there a test? You know, you have to pass this test, you have to tell me
Read the
who
catechism.
read the catechism, who's the Trinity, what's this, what that. Okay, no, you can't go back again, no. It's just, we're gonna meet them where they are and move them forward in the journey. I mean, that's really what it is. So it does need to be both, because I do have pastors sometimes that say, well, it's just so touchy-feely, all you do is talk the whole time. Well, no, that's not true, Father. We do, you know, we start with a subject, and that leads to conversation. But, you know, breaking open what was said in the gospel, connecting it to what happened, if a good homilist talks about 9/11, that's something you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
You're going to take it on into the church and talk about it. So as you guys preach, please preach about relevant things that have happened. Take that gospel.
Prejudice that's coming from that.
Exactly. Move that gospel forward, because the words are so powerful and they can change people's lives if you do it well. And I know when, and I'm getting on a sidebar, but I know when the election was over, my husband was supposed to preach that weekend. And I said, you're gonna say something, right? He goes, I have to. I said, yeah, you have to. So he did, and the way he did it, people that were for Trump came up and said thank you, people that weren't came up and said thank you. Because he didn't talk about the issue, he talked about being together and not dividing, unity. Right, I asked other parishes, what did your pastor talk about? Oh, just the readings.
Yeah, we talked.
You know, you can't ignore things like that, you can't ignore them, please don't. I almost think deacons have a little more leeway to do some of that than pastors do. But that's my own personal opinion.
We live in a different world up here.
Well, we have a whole
Different beings.
skill set in beings and a pastor, exactly. All right, so there are the 4 stages that I have been alluding to, and I want to do that, alluding to. We have the evangelization and the pre-catechumen, that's our inquiry period, okay? It can be 3 months, and then I'm going to show you, you can have one going all year if you want. Catechumenate is the second one. Then the next one is our purification and enlightenment. I'm going to break these all down for you. And then our post-baptismal or our mystagogy period, okay? And they have distinct focuses of evangelization, inquiry, faith formation, mystagogy, and integration into the life and the story of the community. Because the church isn't the building, it's the people, it's the body of Christ. And that's really what we're trying to bring to them, besides the formal, you know, who is Mary and who is Joseph and, you know, this and that. It's also the faith community and what that means, and what it means to be Catholic, really, and what are social teachings and what do we believe. So, all right, so let's take a look at, someone is asking about, you know, more focused from the diocese, and really about, that I can address that, is our pastoral directive. So you have a handout in your folder. It just says it says Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, okay? And this is actually coming out of our 2015 pastoral directives, okay? These were done right before, right after Lester left, maybe or right before he left. So it has, if you've not seen one of these in your parish office, you should get it, because there's a lot of stuff on the liturgical life of the church, and about baptism, and about but baptism and communion. There's downloadable on the website.
Okay.
I also have it if you need it downloadable, but your pastor should have one too. But anyway. So let's look at these directives really quick, because they do talk about, let's make sure we've covered everything. So it is mandatory in every parish. That's what our directives say. Every parish should be doing some form of RCIA. It should be the full ride, it should be done completely the way it is. But we have challenges in our smaller parishes and in our missions, so they do the best they can. But the hope is that if someone comes up and says, I want to join the church, someone says, oh, we can't help you, sorry, then we don't do that, so, okay? Yeah, gotta go somewhere else. Yeah, we can go
We're
somewhere
not
else.
gonna go.
Well, and you know, it's interesting that you bring that up, because they do have a choice. When people call me and ask me, how do they become Catholic, I immediately say, you need to go to the parish that's nearest to you. But sometimes they say, but I work right downtown. Well, then go to the cathedral, that's
That's an
fine,
option,
you
we're
know,
not
there's
being
some
told
options.
that they gotta go.
Exactly, exactly. So,
It's Ruth,
Yeah.
question.
mhm.
Supposedly, you know somebody that knows their faith, they know a lot about Catholicism. And they have a relationship with the priest, and
Mhm.
he can baptize them outside the process, correct?
He's not supposed to.
But he can.
That's supposed to.
Does he have the determination? He
I
has,
Supposed to.
Let me, this is what I always preface my training with. There are the documents that I am required to explain to you and espouse. There's reality. Okay? Okay? Yes, he can. He can, and sometimes in danger of death, he does.
okay,
So-
now I'm gonna, that's leading to my next question. What about a deacon? Deacon probably has to go to the priest to get permission to do a baptism, correct?
If in the danger of a death,
No, I'm just saying, you know, like I gave you a case.
I would, yes, I would certainly, you know, that's a whole, have you not had baptism yet?
Huh?
Have you not had the
No,
baptism
no.
yet? Because grandma can baptize the baby in the water.
Yeah.
We can, yeah, we
I
can,
mean,
yeah, but-
so yeah, a deacon could too, but in
Okay, but you're
this
saying-
instance, when it's bringing an older person into the church, I think you could perform the baptism, but you better get permission from your pastor.
You're saying like you have a neighbor that knows you
Yeah.
really well, you're thinking, hey, what do I gotta do?
Well, and if they've come to you and
Right.
said, I wanna join the church, would you help me, would you bring me in? I mean, yeah, yeah, so I think you should just talk to your pastor and say, this is what I would like to do. It's unusual, because usually you really want to, but.
Because that's how I got in the church, by the way.
Okay, yeah,
Baptism's one thing, the full rite's another.
exactly.
You mean-
He still made us go through
No.
the program.
Did they make you go through the program?
Well, I met with him
He's
over a
okay.
beer every
He's
other
okay.
week
Okay,
for
so
about
he
2
did,
years.
so he did his own
We
personal.
should advertise that.
Well, and you know, honestly, that's how it was done prior to Vatican II, and for a long time after, until it really got going, is the priest met with the person on a regular basis, once a week or once every other week, and he did the catechizing, and they were brought into the church, absolutely. And I still have one or two pastors that do that, which is strange to me when in this day and age, there's a lot more opportunity to get the lay involved in the community of them. Because what that creates sometimes, and you were different because you're the type of person you are, but what that can create sometimes is this exclusiveness that this person only knows the priest and doesn't understand the full community.
Sure.
Exactly. You had a question?
So, as the year goes by from month to month to month, is there any ebb and flow to the inquiries? Like, do we get a lot of inquiries after the Advent or Lent?
You know, it just really depends. I don't know if you guys have noticed anything, it just really depends.
Yeah, Mary
On the
mentioned to
people.
me she has 3 more for next year.
Exactly, for next year, yeah. You know, it's just hard to say. I don't really think.
The
there's
reason I bring this
Uh-huh.
up, it just seems to me that, and maybe this is just adult faith formation, but we get so many people that we don't see except for Christmas and Easter,
Mhm.
and I don't see any targeting to bring them back. I mean,
Well, there are all kinds of programs out there. I know St. John does one called Welcome Back, or Welcoming the Catholic Back. And they actually have a little program and they meet after Christmas and after Easter for about, I think it's about 3 months. They do a program once a week for 3 months, and they bring them back into the community. So again, that's a totally different area that I haven't.
But it's not a diocesan push.
Not at this point. You never know with this bishop. It could very well be on his plate down the road. And I can very well see Deacon being asked to help with that.
Well, that's our wheelhouse.
Rosia has a question.
Well, in the example that Jeff and Mindy just have, they have a set of 3 waiting.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Do you really make them wait that?
I-
Because to me, you kind of missed that moment.
Exactly, and we're gonna
Good
talk
point.
about the inquiry. If you do, see, and sometimes people do, they won't have a year-round catechumenate, but they'll have a year-round inquiry, so they're keeping track of those people the whole entire time. They're maybe meeting them once a month, or they're talking to them on the phone, or they're saying, come and sit with us at Mass, or hey, we have a fish fry, come and have a fish fry. You will get a fair amount of people right after Easter and right after Christmas that are interested. And if you've already done a rite of acceptance and you have the catechumens moving forward, what are you gonna do with these people for, you know? But you can still do some kind of an inquiry, and then at some point, do a rite of acceptance. You don't have to just only do one rite of acceptance. You can do 2 or 3 rite of acceptances and bring them in. So I'll show that to you in just a minute, how that process
The
works.
minute you start telling people,
Yes,
you
yes.
just make them, that becomes.
It's terrible.
It's a problem.
Well, it is,
Lose
yeah.
my interest?
It was a
Well,
problem.
it is,
That's the
and you
way I
never
think.
wanna say that, and that's what, when I work with coordinators, I say, please, if you don't have an inquiry, something, get one, because I don't care what it looks like, but you can't tell someone, they call right after Easter, and you can't say, well, we don't start till September.
We do that with.
That's
And
okay.
you
We
can't
do that with
that.
Deacons.
Yeah.
I get to put people down.
I know, and it's not right.
Start
You
two
shouldn't, you shouldn't have to do that, because first of all,
Do you do
It
that,
took
Jeremy?
all-
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I answer the parish phone and I have to tell people that all
That's
the
what we
time.
do.
wait
So
till
what?
September? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
terrible.
mean, they'll call in
It's
December
No,
and they
it's,
say
you
you have to
can't,
wait
you
till
shouldn't do that.
September.
You should have some kind of an inquiry program going all year, and I don't care what it looks like. Sit with them at church, go have coffee with them, have them come to the fish fry, it just really doesn't matter. But it has taken a certain amount of courage for that person to pick up that phone and say, hey, I'm thinking about joining the church. And I'm gonna tell you one thing, there's a little other face when they go to and say, hey, I'm thinking about joining the church, where they say, come on in. So we can't do that, and that's not being evangelizing at all. That's not being welcoming. So I do tell the ones that have a 9-month process to please, 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 take those phone calls, get to know this person, and figure out, stick them with a sponsor, do something so that they're involved. Invite them to the Easter Vigil so they can see what that's all about. And there's ways to get them involved. Okay. Let's look at the second directive. The process will span over 1 year. Again, that's the directive. It's hard to say what that's going to look like. It might be 10 months, it might be 12 months, it might be longer. Sometimes you have catechumens that stay another whole year. They're just not ready, for whatever reason, to take that step. Okay? The length of the preparation for candidates, and this is what we were talking about with my husband, depends on their readiness and their reception into the church. So it may occur at another time other than the Easter Vigil. Okay? So you can bring those candidates, if they're catechized and they're ready, you can bring them in at any time. Okay?
I'm sorry, Ruth, what does that look like? I've never seen.
And
been
we'll go
involved
over it
with
in the book. It
Okay.
uses actually a rite of reception, and I mean, it's what I showed you earlier. It's those 5 things that create the procession. They have to go to confession before, things like that, and then you just bring them to the church. Okay? And it can be done at Mass or outside of Mass. So we'll talk about it. I know the ones at my parish, a lot of times they just do it outside of Mass. They'll just do it right after Mass, and then the family has a party. The text of adults with the U.S. appendix is essential for involving implementing the rite. So this is what your pastor more than likely has to use, is the actual rite book, okay? And, no, it does not want to do it that way. Okay, oh, and then 5 is that you should have a copy of the study guide to follow. That's the one thing I always ask people to have. The tabs you have to put in yourself, which we bought, I think Drew bought for you, which is really nice. And they are invaluable. So take the time to get those tabs put onto the right, because it's a big, huge book, and if I want to look up the catechumenate, I can go right to the tab and pull it up. It's marvelous, because there is not really, I mean, look at the contents. You can do it that way too, but it's just so much easier if you've got the tabs. And they have things for the catechumenate, and then all of the rites for the catechumenate, the different periods. They have, I think the blue is for children, the yellow is for exceptional circumstances or an initiation of in danger of death. Then they have the things for candidates, and then they also have the combined rites, which many of our parishes do. So you have catechumens and candidates, then you have the combined rites. So take the time to put, I'm glad you got them for them, because they don't come with them. And they just are so very, very helpful. And if you get really, really involved in RCA, your book will look like this, but that's okay. Write all over it and use it, because it's a wonderful thing. And it answers a lot of your questions. So, and some of the stuff we're gonna talk about, I've tried to preface with the paragraph numbers. And then the sacrament of confirmation takes place in the context and is subject to the directives relevant to the process. Confirmation is not to be postponed until the next visit by the bishop, okay? So in other words, what they're saying is the priest has a right to do confirmation after Easter Vigil, okay? And that's where he should be doing it, or the next morning, because some of them will do the candidates or the kids the next morning and not involve them that night. Yeah, so it should not be postponed. And what I had happen last year is I had people sending, they got, and you're supposed to do all 3 sacraments of initiation, and we'll talk about that, but I had them doing, and I think the priests just didn't understand, they were doing baptism and First Communion, and they waited and sent them to the adult confirmation at the cathedral, because once they were baptized, they were Catholic, so then they didn't have the right to do it. But this is the one time that they do. And to be honest, unless it's a Catholic, they can call or write the bishop and say, this person didn't go through the Easter Vigil, they are deathly ill, they were all ready, can I bring them into the church next week? Yes, you may. This person's enrollment took forever, and we didn't put them through the rite of election because we knew it was going to be a 3-year process. It finally came through, it's July. Do I have permission to bring them into the church? Yes, you do. So they have permissions they can get permissions at other times, but at that Easter period, they do have the permission to baptize, confirm.
Ignorant question,
No.
I'm sorry. Right of election, is that, they actually become confirmed? Is that?
No, the rite of election we'll talk about, but it's when they go to the cathedral and they sign, everyone says they're signing their name away, but that's not what that is. It's not a binding contract, right? Right, okay. So those are the directives, and they're in, and they should be followed as close as we can. Wait, did I get the last one? Oh. Validly baptized Catholic Christians from other than the Orthodox churches are confirmed during the Easter Vigil when they are received formally. So you may get, let's see, other than, okay, that's talking about the candidates, okay. All right, and so but the point we need to know is we need to figure out where these people are coming, who are coming to us, and then how do we lead them on the journey, the path provides the best experience of formation for them. So it's all going to be a little bit different. Are they catechumen or are they candidate? If you have any questions at all, please call me. I had someone call me yesterday. They had a person who had been told their whole life that they were baptized Methodist, but no record of it. And when they went back to the church, it had burned down. And as we know, some of our other faiths do not keep records like the Catholic Church does. So then they started asking family members, but family members couldn't quite remember. Mom was the only one who knew. She had dementia. Sometimes she didn't even know who the son was.
I
We're
believe
gonna
what you're
do
saying, but I need to be.
We're going to do a conditional baptism for them. And they just called me to say, is this what we do? And I said, yes, that is what you do.
Conditional
A
baptism.
conditional baptism. It's where you change the words. In case you have not been baptized before, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son. And it's in this book, and it's actually in the rite of baptism when you get to that class, okay? And you would do that, they become a candidate, and then they go through the rest of RCA and to the vigil as a candidate.
That happened to me.
To you?
Really?
They couldn't find your records?
Yeah, so it was St. Patrick's in Eureka.
Yes,
Just a
that's a tiny little parish.
tiny little church, and
Yep.
there was just one religious order priest who wasn't even diocesan,
Yeah?
and he didn't keep
Keep
records.
records, yep.
And so when we went to get married,